All right. Well, welcome everybody to our first event of the new year. We're really happy to have you all with us. My name is Don Hall, and I currently serve as Executive Director of Transition US. Before I introduce my colleague, Jessica Alvarez Parfrey, who will be leading tonight's roundtable, I want to thank everyone who donated to our year-end fundraiser. Together, we are Regeneration Nation. More than 130 individuals have stepped up so far to contribute over $94,000 to support the work of Transition US in general, and in particular, our new 3-year Regeneration Nation campaign. At its heart, this campaign is about spreading credible hope for the future. It seems that everywhere we look these days, the challenges we're facing as a society, whether that be climate chaos, the coronavirus pandemic, racial injustice, or political polarization, are only accelerating, and those in positions of power are doing little to change course. It is unlikely that real hope will come for them. We will have to make it ourselves. Fortunately, there are many individuals and groups throughout this country who are already creating the conditions for this authentic hope to emerge. Some of them are part of the Transition Towns movement here in the US, but many more belong to a larger movement of movements for just and regenerative communities that is highly decentralized and diverse. While decentralization and diversity are core strengths of this movement, they also sometimes make it harder to see. Through Regeneration Nation, we're aiming to connect the dots between these many brilliant initiatives, so that people everywhere can see them as part of a much larger whole and begin to embrace them as an attractive and viable alternative to the status quo. In doing so, we hope to rouse the collective spirit out of apathy and despair and into inspired action. This is the journey that we're embarking on here tonight. That said, I will now turn it over to our wonderful programs director, Jess Alvarez Parfrey, who will introduce the newest member of our staff team, Brett Carr.
Thank you, Don. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. I'm really excited to get into the conversation with these amazing women to explore what it would take to create these life-affirming cultures of care that we know that we need now more than ever. I'm also really excited to announce that Transition US, which has always operated as a scrappy nonprofit, very much connected to the grassroots, uplifting the voices and visions of community, is growing. And we've added a new staff member, Brett Carr. So I want to give you, Brett, a minute to introduce yourself to folks in the network who've been with us and are with us on this growth journey. Over to you, Brett.
Thanks so much, Jess. Nice to meet everybody out there. As Jess mentioned, my name's Brett. I'm super humbled. I'm super glad and excited to be a part of this group. I've done a lot of work in the past on both coasts of the US and actually the third coast of the US, which some call Lake Michigan. Doing a lot of work in renewable energy, youth-led, social movements, food security, all different types of things. And I just see Transition as a wonderful collective of people. And I am really excited about this Regeneration Nation movement. So glad to be a part of it. I'm glad to tap into all of your collective energy, wisdom, connections. I'm sure you all have a lot to give and you're doing it already. So I'm just excited to be a part of the group. And of course, I'm going to be here for the conversation. I may even chime in at the end with a nice little thank you for you all for tuning in and for your presence. So thanks so much, Jess, and back over to you.
Thank you, Brett. I want to offer to folks who are maybe just learning a bit more about Regeneration Nation some of the core goals, and then I'm going to introduce our amazing guests here this evening and get started with our conversation. But just again, to remind folks, the goals of Regeneration Nation are to nurture a network ecosystem of regenerative communities, actively sharing and co-creating the messages, models, and resources needed to reimagine and rebuild our world. We know that this work cannot be done alone. It cannot be held by one single superstar organization. We really need to lean into our relationships and our partnerships with each other. I believe relationships are going to be a really important theme that comes through in this evening's conversation. Regeneration is also a concept that is not something new or flashy that's meant to replace the idea of sustainability or resilience. I really see it as this ancient truth and a return to the side of life. I took some time to read through Paul Hawkins' amazing new book, Regeneration, and there was one quote in there that really stood out to me as we think about the ways to most effectively address the climate crisis, the social and ecological crisis, which are obviously interconnected. The most complex, radical climate technologies on Earth are the human heart, head, and mind. And for folks who are familiar with Transition US, we emphasize the work of the head, heart, and the hands working in synchronicity. And so I feel really excited to sit in conversation with these amazing women and really explore that idea. I'm going to get started introducing our guest, but I want to give Marissa a second to introduce herself. She's an amazing staff member who's been with the organization for 7+ years, and she's also going to be joining us in this conversation this evening. Over to you, Marissa.
Okay, hi everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces and names. I'm here in rural Western Colorado, which is ancestral Ute land. I've been working with Transition US, for 9 years. I think I'm about to have my 9-year anniversary. That feels like a big deal for me, being I'm 34. That's been kind of the biggest thing I've done since finishing school. And the reason I've stayed with it this long, the main thing is the people. I like to say, truly, you all give me hope for humanity. And as a mom, that's there's not much more valuable than that. I'm also a farmer, entrepreneur, and busy with my 5-year-old son. Very honored and truly feel humbled to be here tonight on a panel with you. Wonderful, amazing women. Thank you.
Thanks, Marissa. So I'm going to get started introducing Julie Cordero-Lamb. Thank you so much for being with us here. I'm going to go ahead and let folks know a little bit more about you, and then you can offer a bit more about your work as we get started with the questions. So Julia Cordero-Lamb is a grassroots herbalist and teacher of traditional regenerative horticulture in her family's homeland, the unceded tribal territory of the Central Coastal Chumash. She is an enrolled member of the Coastal Band of the Chumash Nation and founded the Siuxtun Plant Mentorship Collective in 2016. Julie also co-founded the Chumash Maritime Association in 1996, which brought traditional Chumash plank canoes back into the Chumash family circle. She did her MA PhD work at UCSB, but opted out of an academic career in order to practice traditional regenerative horticulture at the grassroots community level and to raise her children on her farm in Washington State. She writes, makes things, grows and preserves food, and farms 8 acres in the cedar forests in the Salish Sea area with her spouse, 2 children, 2 housemates, their 2 children, and many special plants and animals. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next amazing guest, Samantha Wright. Samantha Wright is the executive director of Project Regeneration, a new nonprofit media company dedicated to helping people imagine and build a regenerative future. Previously, Samantha worked in the film industry, leading campaigns at Participant and Exposure Labs. Titles she she has worked on include Dark Waters, Judas and the Black Messiah, American Factory, Chasing Coral, and The Social Dilemma. Samantha currently lives in Berkeley, California with her husband and 2 tiny humans. Welcome, Samantha. Wonderful. So I have prepared a list of questions to get us started, but the intention for this evening is for us to have an organic and realist conversation as we can, being that we come with the experience of mothers and folks actively invested in this work of building more regenerative culture that can sustain and nourish future generations. So I'm going to get started with the first question. And again, to our guests, if something comes to mind that you want to take us in a certain way, let's go with it. Let's keep it real. So I'm going to start with the first question. Tell us more about your work. What are you most passionate about? And what does the essence of regeneration mean to you? And Julie, I would want to send it over to you to get us started, if that's okay.
Okay, sure. Well, first and foremost, I'm passionate about working with youth and working with plants. That's been my primary work since I was pretty young, is just learning about all of the different amazing uses that my ancestors have for plants that our tradition still holds. And at first, I think I started with a sort of like, let's replace this. And my elders quickly disabused me of that notion. They let me know, no, this is about how we situate ourselves in the land in a way that every cut, every word, every bite, and everything we do grows good things. And that's the heart of regenerative culture. And they would tell me what little they knew about how our ancestors had regenerative economies, which unfortunately the Spanish missions completely wiped out. And as a young person, I was so driven by outrage by what we'd lost. And that has only increased as I've become a mother, because what my children are missing more than anything else is a village to grow up in, and a place where there are many, many hands taking care of lots and lots of work that's all regenerative. So the sense of bringing people back to my family's traditional homeland, we don't have in our very unceded tribal territory of Santa Barbara, California. We are not a federally recognized tribe, we're a state recognized tribe. So how we've been able to get this work done is by convincing the powers that be to allow us access to our own tribal homelands so that we can do the things that our ancestors passed on for us to do. And I can talk more about what that is later, but as a parent and as an auntie, because that's definitely who I am back in Santa Barbara, all the young people are my nieces and nephews. You know, we don't worry about the degrees to which we're related. We're all from the same families, and I'm an auntie there. My passion is showing them what it really means to belong to a place, not just to be told, hey, your family's been here for 15,000 years, although that's kind of mind-blowing when you're from a place for that long. Or here's how to use this plant, and here's where to find it, and this is the time of year that you gather it. But thinking of the plants not as its, but they and our family members, and really bringing into the young people's hearts exactly what that means in a real world, boots on the ground, head in the bushes kind of way. And to watch them come into that realization that, oh, I actually belong here. I'm a human being in my tribal homeland, and it needs me here as much as I need to be here. The plants are happy to see me coming because I know what I'm doing. And they're going to thrive for my having been here. To watch that realization slowly dawn in the young people's minds that this is how you belong to a place. This is how it's done, not just talked about. This is how you do it. And here's what happens when you do it. Here's how you change. Here's how the land changes when you're acting in a regenerative, reciprocal fashion with all of the non-human life forms that are in your tribal homeland. And that right there, my 20 apprentices and I are working very hard to figure out how do we take that experience and that understanding of being part of a place to the larger mainstream community, because this absolutely has got to happen. This is the one thing we want everyone to appropriate. We would not consider this to be inappropriate appropriation. Don't take the headdresses, take this, take the idea and the way of being part of this place that causes thriving and not destruction. So as a mom and as an auntie, that's my passion.
Oh, thank you, Julie. I want to offer the same question to you, Samantha. Tell us a little bit more about your work. What are you most passionate about? And what does the essence of regeneration mean to you?
Gosh, it's hard to go after Julie. I mean, I just feel like, wow, that's just, there's so many threads there that I'm excited to come back to. What's the essence of, gosh, these are such, I feel like these questions are like such huge questions. How do you answer these questions? Just, in brief, I've spent the last, decade or more in the film business kind of by accident. And it really was born out of a passion in, discovering that storytelling is one of the most powerful ways that we can shift how people feel and ultimately how people act. And really thinking about how we harness the power of storytelling to do good in the world is something that just lights me up over and over and over again. And I've had the great pleasure to work on lots of different titles and lots of different issues, working in partnership with movements, whether it be the girls' education movement, climate movement, the future of work, folks working on the future of work, people working on racial justice, and many other spaces. And, the thing that struck me as I have gotten a chance to work with these incredible artists and activists was over and over again, folks were coming to the same core problem, something that Julie, you mentioned. I mean, at the center, our fundamental disconnection with each other and the planet, and how that at the center of it, at the root of the root of the root, was leading to all of these problems across all these different overlapping movements. And that was this really big aha for me. And I think it is what has brought me into the universe of regeneration, because what I started to see talking to folks in these overlapping movements was that people were so hungry for a new story, and it turns out an old story, but a new story, a new dominant story that we could get around, get behind, and be a part of. And so that brought me to a conversation with Paul Hawken as he was finishing touches of Regeneration, and I joined him to build this new nonprofit organization, Project Regeneration. And we're really, the book just launched in September. We are just kicking things off, but really the vision is to be of service to this movement, this emerging, burgeoning movement of people who see that it could be different, and we need to bring more people into this way of thinking and into this way of building and of creating together. And we're personally, I couldn't be more passionate about the power of story as a catalyst to bring folks together and help bring us to just better and better relationship with one another. So that's what brings me to this work.
Beautiful. Thank you, Samantha. Marissa, I want to bring you into the conversation. What are you most passionate about? What drives you? What does the essence of regeneration mean to you?
The essence of regeneration, I think, is putting life at the center. I loved that in the Regeneration book, like putting life at the center of all of our actions and decisions. And it's such a simple way to talk about it. I remember when I first started studying permaculture and had a barren patch of earth in my rental backyard to work with, and was able to see how much life came back in just a few years of tending that. And now whenever my partner and I are in the area, we spy on this house where we used to live to see how big those trees are now. And nobody's doing anything to steward it at this point. It's just the cycle has returned, the cycle of life has returned. That's what regeneration means to me. And probably also one of the things I'm most passionate about is just bringing back life. But there were many other things that both Julie and Samantha touched on that spoke to me as well. And that piece around the new story and youth, I think about, I'm raising a white man. I don't take that responsibility lightly at all. And I'm able to teach him the new story, and his imagination is wide open. He doesn't have those filters and that conditioning yet, and he is able to see the world in a different way than, you know, obviously mainstream America, mainstream society views it. And it just fills me up so much to see how he relates to the earth.
Really appreciating you all. And I'll go ahead and offer my reflection on the question. I agree. It's returning to life. Like life is there waiting for us, and it's returning to that embrace. It's returning to that relationship. I'm raising a 7-year-old. The pandemic has been really challenging and has really forced me to kind of like sit with what my priorities are. And as we emerge from this experience, as we integrate the lessons from this collective like experience, I really I'm holding to hope, but I'm looking beyond hope. I'm looking to the work that needs to happen, regardless of whether or not we can describe it as hopeful or not. And again, my kid drives me, the youth drives me. That's a lot of my experience and my kind of first encounter with transition. I helped to co-found the EcoVista initiative, which is based in Isla Vista on Chumash land and territory. But I remember returning to UCSB after having taken like a big break, you know, traditional go to college after high school kind of thing. And really coming back with a new set of eyes. I had become a mother, I'd gotten married, and just really feeling how the institution was not offering opportunities that were needed for this moment in time that we were in. And just hearing from a lot of students, their experiences dealing with an institution that perpetuates a lot of those same kind of settler colonial narratives, that extraction kind of mentality. How do you make money off of certain jobs? And just like this need for a whole new kind of skill set. And a lot of it is just returning to community, returning to life, returning to relationship, and having new stories, as folks have already mentioned. I think there's a lot here. I'm also like overwhelmed by the threads and possibilities, but I want to bring it back to you, Julie. You mentioned how there's a right way to engage with the wisdom of Indigenous communities, folks who are holding a lot of the biodiversity of this planet right now at such a critical time, folks who have the wisdom to guide us forward. What would be your vision in terms of like how we could better mobilize resources from our institutions, from our governments to support this work and expand it in the right way? Because I also feel the urgency, but urgency isn't always the right way to operate. So I don't know if that's a clear question, but that just came up as I was kind of reflecting.
That's a big old question.
It's a giant question. So feel free to
thank you
talk on whatever is juicy to you.
Sure. I think that's something I'm also very concerned about. I've been a homeschooling mom for 15 years, and I just recently let my 12-year-old go into the public school system here because she just needed friends because we're so isolated, especially from COVID. She just needed people. So I let her do that. And now I'm interfacing with this institution and realizing nothing has changed. The only thing that's changed since the time I was in institutional public schools and Catholic schools when I was a kid is that there's much more safety for LGBTIQ youth. And that's wonderful. And there's a lot more awareness of racial inequities. And I'm happy to see that even in a very, very rural white town like Stanwood. But UCSB needs to get on board. They need to be leading the way. They live on unceded tribal territory. Their bookstore is on our cemetery for the village that's there. I interfaced with UCSB for quite some time when I was a graduate student there. And one of the short stories that I have about the complete lack of awareness that's at that university was when they were considering an Indigenous Studies minor, not a major, just a minor, and they weren't going to approve it. And finally, I was called in to talk to the chancellor. And my friends were like, Julie, we know you're busy, but you need to come and sit down and convince this guy that we need this minor. We're going to lose it. And I came in and I'm like, oh my God, what do I say? And thankfully, what to say came to me. And I said, Chancellor Yang, do you know what village this is? And he said, sorry. And I said, this village had one name for over 10,000 years. Do you know what it is? And he said, no. I said, it's the village of Heliuk, and it was a center of education and learning. And I would think that UCSB would need to know that this is a modern incarnation of the institutions of learning in math and astronomy and science that were a part of the West Coast tradition for many thousands of years. This is the village of Heliuk. The fact that you don't know that, as the chancellor of this university says, we need an Indigenous Studies minor, if not a department. So the minor was instituted, but there's still no major. This was 20 something years ago. And again, nothing has changed. They have the minor. We got a little space at the student resources building. The Indigenous students at UCSB are amazing, and they are doing such incredible work, particularly around these issues, as you might imagine, right? So I want to shout out to all of those, Indigenous studies and cultural studies and ethnic studies students at UCSB who are trying to change the institution from within. But we all know that way lies madness. The institution needs to change almost entirely. So some of the ideas that I have, and I don't know how much they involve UCSB, so much as they have to involve the entire UC system, because the University of California is the largest non-governmental landowner in California. They own quite a lot of unceded traditional Chumash territory, and we want a lot of it back. So the land back movement vis-a-vis the university, I think, is something that we need to really work on. But outside the university, and they can plug themselves into this as much as they want, the ideas that my small little group have in conjunction with other tribal areas in California, particularly the Yurok, the Karuk, the Amamutsun of the Bay Area, and folks down south, the Kuya and the Tataviam and the, sorry, I'm forgetting the name. I'll come back to it. But we're working on bringing back what we call the good fires. And this is a way that we can use what we're passing on to the young people right now in terms of how do you go into a place that has been neglected, that has not had us as doing our regenerative horticultural practices in those places for really 100 years. And now those places are horribly neglected. There's a fuel load from not having been pruned, from not having been interacted with. And it's one of the problems it's one of the factors that's causing these massive out of control wildfires in California. Drought has always been a part of California. Climate change is exacerbating that tremendously. But also, when we were the ones who were taking care of this land, the fires were light. They rolled across the land. They did not destroy sequoias. Clearly, they did not destroy the sequoias. We know how to manage the land. We still know how to take care of places so that when fires come, they're medicine. And they're like, again, we talk about fire as a relative. We talk about fire as like the grandfather that comes through, the aunties that come through and burn off all of the dead stuff that nobody needs anymore and make all of the plants more water efficient, less kind of tangled, more productive for all of the plants and animals that need them. We know how to do this still. We almost lost it. That information was almost lost, but just a few elders that kept passing it on made sure they did. So what we know from having done that fire management work completely by hand without the actual use of fire, because we're in Santa Barbara County. All of our beautiful wild areas are completely surrounded by mansions. People get real nervous if you start talking about fire, and I don't blame them. We don't want to light anything. Thank you. So what we've been doing is doing it by hand. And that's incredibly labor intensive. So what we need is everyone. What we need is thousands of people, not just us few dozen here and a few dozen there, going in and saying, okay, this is a place here where there are an unusual number of very culturally important plants and medicines and foods and tool materials. How do we take care of this place? Well, we'll show you one plant at a time. Well, that's too slow for what California needs right now. California needs all the loving hands on deck, all the knowledgeable hands on deck. We need to teach people parts of our language that shows them not only how to think in a non-noun-based way, how to think of these plants as beings and all of the animals as characters in their own story, thank you very much, and relatives that we interact with repeatedly, coming back to them again and again, every spring, returning to life, every spring, relearning the stories of the place that's being told that year. That kind of connection. We want everyone to have that in California, because that's how we take care of that place. That's how California can come back to life and be more drought tolerant. How many billions of dollars are being spent fighting fires in California? How much of that could be siphoned over to create a different kind of economy where people are learning how to, the able-bodied people are learning how to actually do the work. The people who don't have that kind of ability can come in and advise. The people who just need to sit at a table and process all that plant material have a place to do that. All of those people participating in an economy in California that's preventing fires. I mean, that is a really, really important thing that's going on in California right now. We need to address it. All of the fighting in the world is not going to stop those fires. We need to come about it from the ground, from the indigenous people. We're the ones who know how to do this. So on a big scale, I mean, I just kind of word dumped on you, but that's where we can see institutions like UCSB, municipal districts, fire districts, state and county can come in and participate in this process, but only if we're not just one of the people that has a seat at their table. This is our table. We know what we're doing very well. And we've shown people like the Nature Conservancy and the Park Service that we do actually know what we're doing. They come into the places where we've been doing our work and they're just blown away. They're like, we've never seen it like this before. Like, if you read the diaries of the early Spaniards, or especially the diaries of like John Muir, they tell you exactly what California used to look like. And we know how to do that. So this needs to be our table. We need to be, instead of being the only unpaid people sitting at the table, giving our time away for free because we love the land, we need to be in charge of these projects. They need to listen to us, and they need to do exactly as we say regarding the regenerative horticultural practices. We need to be the ones training the people who want to come in, who are non-tribal members. We need to be talking about what the pay would look like. We need to be involved at every single level of this happening. That's something that's just now starting to gain traction in California. The UROC have been working very successfully with the tribal governments and the state and local governments in that place. The Mommaerts in the Bay Area are making really good headway in that area too. Almost nothing is happening in Santa Barbara. It's an incredibly wealthy area. They're not really used to listening to us, but they're starting to quite a bit more. So that's kind of my organization and what we're trying to make happen right now in California. UCSB can get involved if they want to, but they'd be smart to do that. I think they'd really be able to work that into their environmental studies program in a pretty major, groundbreaking way, and it needs to happen. If I lived there, I would be able to do a lot more with it. But right now, I'm homeschooling special needs kids, and that's what I'm doing. But the young people that I've been working with have been taking these seeds of these ideas and growing them as best they can. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing maybe more happening when we can travel a little more freely and be with each other again.
Thank you, Julie. Samantha, I'm curious, how can, in your mind, media and storytelling help to uplift this kind of work and direct resources where they need to go? Or if you have any other threads from what Julie just shared that you would want to pursue, please do.
Hi, baby.
Oh, we have a guest star. Gosh, again, Julie, going after you, I always just be like, there's so many threads in what you shared, and just really.
I do go on.
And no, I appreciated just the layers to what you're sharing, and the struggle to bring it to life. So thank you for that. And I feel like it's a link just to build on what Julie's saying and storytelling. What I've observed at the intersection of storytelling and social change is that there are so many people fighting for justice, fighting for what's right, trying to push the narratives and the ways that we come to understand things. And we're often working across purposes. We're often scattered. We often don't have much power. One of the things I find with the power of storytelling is that it can unite and bring people together and help create stronger relationships for us to be working better together. And there are a few parts to that. One is the substance of the story themselves, like the story we're telling, right? Who is telling the stories? Whose voices are we lifting up? How are those stories constructed? Who are the heroes of that story? I mean, there's just obviously a whole art to that work, but really, creating space for new stories to be shared and to be knitted together itself is something that I see great power in, because it opens people's eyes and hearts in ways that make it easier to do the work, right? Because people, I think of Professor Yang, or I can't remember the exact name of the person you mentioned talking to 20 years ago, but had he or she, maybe heard the right story, they might have been more or less receptive to these ideas. And so I think that there's something really powerful in spending time exploring what are the stories we're telling, who are the voices we're lifting up, and how do we, think about what's the stories we should be telling. And then on the other side, and this is sort of a particular area of passion for mine, is once you have wonderful stories, how do you use those stories to greatest effect? And the thing I've seen a lot is that a really great story can start people working together. It can start to actually knit networks together. It can start to create the conditions for people to be self-organizing in all sorts of places. And when that's done really thoughtfully, this is, we're turning more into sort of the practice of movement building and movement strengthening. You start to create more and more power around new and alternative ways of thinking and designing and being. And, when I hear, Julie, what you're saying, like, my mind is actually going to, like, well, how do we build the power of people like you and organizations like the one you're leading and other like-minded folks? And what does that look like? And, how do you get it so that it is your table? Again, and what does that look like? And so for me, story is a way to start is a tool, is a gift often to those processes, if you can use it thoughtfully. And a lot of that comes back to how do we create networks and networks of networks that are more resilient, that are more interconnected. And what has been inspiring to me is that change is very much nonlinear. I've seen it across lots of different movements, but if you start to do that work of knitting this network together, knitting the network together, all of a sudden you end up at a critical mass, and just like in any ecosystem, it switches to the other way, and something that felt impossible all of a sudden is possible, right? I looked to BLM, Black Lives Matter. I mean, it's remarkable, the shift all of a sudden. It's like no one saw it coming in, and all of a sudden it was here, and everyone sort of the rules of the game and what was possible change. So for me, that's why I light up thinking about story, both because the substance of it moves people in such a deeply human, powerful way, but also the sharing, the sort of the communal quality of storytelling, whether it's around a campfire, whether it's at a movie theater, whether it's in a book club. Those are spaces for us to basically organize better and to build power that actually shifts the institutions we want to change. So I think one of my personal missions is just to convince more people to use it as a feather in their change cap.
Can I respond to something she just said real quick? I promise I won't go on for 10 minutes. What you talked about, people in charge and power structures and being able to bring power back to the people, and that these are communally told stories. That concept is so important. It's one of the things I think we need to absolutely get away from, is the idea of a guru or the sort of rock star that's in charge, or the top-down management. This is something that really messes up a lot of indigenous nonprofits when they form, is having to do things by Robert's rules with the president, a treasurer, and a secretary. And that power structure, that's not ours. In my organization, I say but it's not mine. This is these kids are my boss. Okay. I do what they say. Definitely. Many of them have their own levels of expertise that they brought into this circle. They were already passionate and interested. My cousin Teresa Romero, who's just a few years older than me, she's also in this organization. I would definitely call her a co-leader, and she's the one who's absolutely doing all the fire stuff. I'm the ecologist. I'm the one that takes them in and says, okay, this plant's this, and here's how to identify it correctly. And we're not going to talk about male and female parts anymore. We're going to talk about ovule bearing and pollen bearing. So let's get away from that weird binary. But that kind of stuff is my weird, my nitpicky little plant nerd job. But she's the fire manager. She's the one who, we have a horizontal power structure in our organization, and I'm at the head of it because I'm doing all the paperwork and making the connections, but everyone in there is leading the parts that they're the experts in. And when that part has been resolved to a certain level, it shifts to somebody else. That is so important. And one of the things that I've noticed, we actually did have a documentary film made about my group, and I can tell you about that some other time. And the one stipulation I had for doing that work was that they not make it the Julie Cordero-Lamb show, that they needed to make it, they needed to interview everyone in the group. They need to have each of those people discuss their story as part of, doing this traditional ecological knowledge recovery work that we're doing. And that is not what they did. They absolutely made it the Julie Cordero-Lamb show. And all of us were not happy about that. We don't ever recommend this documentary to be shown to people because they had a white professor come in and basically say everything that I just said. So they had a guy in there academic explaining right after me. And we were all just watching this and going, this is not how we wanted this story to be told. This does not have the integrity that we wanted to bring to it. So that what you're saying is just, that is absolutely important. This communally held story, communally held leadership roles, that's the story that needs to be told at this moment in time when we're trying to overcome extractive capitalism. That's our job. We're trying to do something different than that. We have to think very differently. We can't do Robert's rules anymore. So I'm so happy to hear that that's the story you're trying to get out there.
Julie, I'm so glad you said that. The sort of experience I've been having in the media world has been seeing that there's a story structure people are so used to, and people keep defaulting to it, like the hero's journey, basically over and over again, right? New hero's journey, and then it's entertaining, right? I mean, like, I'm used to it. I watched lots of movies in this structure, and it works, and that's why people keep defaulting to it. But it's not the only story structure that's compelling. And so I feel like part of it's sort of more meta, but actually, how can we teach, this is something I'm passionate about. How do you teach creatives and storytellers who tell amazing stories to actually look in other places for inspiration and to embrace other forms of narrative, right? And other story arcs. I mean, an example is, as a participant, we told a lot of hero stories, but I used to like to tell people about an example of a film we made that's not a hero story, which is, oh my gosh, I'm blanking. I'm going to call it Collective because we've been talking about Collective. Let's see, fun fact, won an Oscar about a team of reporters in the Boston Globe. I should know this. This is our
Spotlight.
Thank you. Ding, 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 ding. Thank you, Don. Spotlight is an example of an alternative narrative structure, right? Where it's a team of people coming together to work a problem and fight back on power. And, I think we need to show people other great stories, because people go, yeah, but the hero story is the one that works, right? And you go, no, actually, there's some really exciting, awesome stories that follow different structures. So just to build on what you're saying, Julie, like a big part of Regeneration is showing people other ways of relating to one another. And the way that change happens is not just the almighty powerful coming to save us, right? It's that we can we work together and we create change. And that's, I mean, it's sort of call to action to all of you is, I think we need to be collecting examples of great stories with these other structures, because, we need to be lifting them up and to share them with people and be like, actually, did you know this story or that story? This story is awesome. And you need people to sit up and be like, actually, that is a great story, and bring it to life creatively.
Well, and then they can realize that because this is a communally held story, they're part of that community. They're not just being talked to. They have the opportunity to be involved and belong to that circle.
Totally. I've been thinking a lot about, as we set up our work with Project Regeneration, about how much I've heard it described as like the monolithic myth, the idea that there's like a sort of singular, all-powerful savior, and the sort of cult of the individual has really damned all of us, right? Because it means we feel powerless. We're either giving our power away to the elected officials out there, or corporate titans or whatever, or we have to do it all. And both of those are set up for failure. And so, there's something in a reframe around a more social view of power that actually tells us that our power is in being knit together. To me, that makes me sit up, right? And I think that the center narrative that we're fighting is fighting this vision that change is this sort of brittle, linear, hierarchical thing. And instead it's like, no, it's like it's us. And actually reteaching, unfortunately, we have to reteach so many people the practice of coming together and sharing power, right? That like we have power, but only together. And that's something that, Indigenous communities have known for a long time, but as the systems have changed, and we know the labor movement knew that, and then it was sort of dismantled, and people have discovered and found this, and so it's something that I'm excited for in this moment, is like, how do we create the conditions for more people to realize that like we got this, we can do it, but we have to do it together. And so the art is how you come together, right? Not necessarily where we're going, but actually in doing it as a community. That to me is like the big
where it's at. That's where it's at. Yep. Get some clippers in their hands, get them out on the land, show them what happens when they learn how to prune, show them what happens when they go at the right time, show them what happens when they sit and listen for a while and make sure the habitat is, going to be protected. That kind of, that's the story that's told with very few words. We just go in and I show them, here's what this kind of cut does. Here's what this kind of cut does. Now let's step back and look at the symmetry of the plant. What is it telling you? How does it want to be formed? What's tangling it up? Who's living under here? Who needs this plant all year long? Let's come back to the same plant year after year after year. And it's the fastest way I know for English speakers who are Americans. That includes, my people. We're urban Indian people. We were raised on TV dinners and Netflix and YouTube also, And so for those kids to be able to come in, do the work, watch the result, that story about how we're doing this in a knitted together fashion becomes real in a way that talking isn't going to do.
One, I might offer one build on what you're saying, Julie. One of the insights that I've been surfacing recently, going back to being a student of history of the great movements the last 100 years, it's been the civil rights movement, the movement for marriage equality, and all these others. You have to shift how people think and the sort of cultural conditions. And once you do, everything is a lot easier. It's like swimming upstream rather than against the current. And I mentioned that because one of the things we see in these different movements, sort of in the mass cultural movements that sort of precede the policy movements and the sort of other ones, is the combination of two things, which you're reminding me of, Julie. One is, a network of organizations and people basically creating experiences that are transformational. To actually, these are not just like lectures that people need to absorb. I mean, they need to get into their soul, right? And that is that there's a whole set of work that we need to do to bring people in to transformative experience. And it's different for different people. There's no one size fits all, right? Some people are going to have that experience pruning, and that's going to like blow their mind, and they're going to see differently. And other people might be more you're like a book club gal, you know what I mean? Whatever is your thing, like we need to create lots of experiences that move people. And then the other area we see in sort of building mass cultural movements is a knitting together of alternatives, people doing it differently. And what I see over and over again is that so many people who are at the beginning phases of these burgeoning movements feel so alone in their way. They just feel isolated. And so there's an exciting and important role to be knitting together people, trying it in a different way. And what's been exciting to me is the combination of those two things gives us a focal point of what we need to work on as a movement, right? Is like, how do we keep sparking and creating space and bringing people to those transformative pruning experiences? And then how do we also show people all the different ways it could be, right? Whether it's in horticulture, whether it's in workplace cultures, as we talked about, Jess, you're talking about, and Marissa, like how our families live and show up at work, you know, whether it is in energy, right? There's all these different ways that we got to be woven together. And that again, in the spirit of the community, like that's where we get our power, right? Is in as a group. So I just offer that as a build, Julie, because it's sort of one of the things we're thinking a lot about at Project Regeneration is what does the movement need now, you know, and how can we learn from history to figure out where we should focus to get as much momentum behind these ideas as we can.
Amazing. I love how much you two are vibing right now. Like, I'm just really enjoying it. I wanted to bring Marissa on this note of like returning to relationship with the land, collective stories, transformative experiences. Marissa, I know you're really passionate about community land trusts, and I wanted to bring you in to talk a little bit more about your work there.
Thank you. Yeah, the piece around building power. I believe that like to build a regenerative economy, people, you know, need to be rooted in land. Many of us are not. Land reform is really important to me. And as one of my mentors, Mateo Nube, has shared from Movement Generation that, this was a few years ago, he might have a different view now, but the US is really lacking a land reform movement compared to other parts of the world. Like we see the landless workers movement in Brazil, for example. And community land trusts are a great tool for securing land for public good, taking it out of the speculative market. It's a good way to leverage kind of personal capital intergenerationally. That's some of the work that I'm doing right now, is looking at, okay, who has the resources, who can put them in to secure the land for now, and then we figure out how to create equitable ownership or stewardship structures. And we have this beautiful example of the Dishkamu Humboldt Community Land Trust, a partnership between Cooperation Humboldt, the Wiyot tribe, and then their full spectrum capital partners. But that's something that I will continue bringing forward. And another thing I wanted to mention about building power is that a lot of community groups, folks who are here tonight, have those relationships with their local governments and can leverage them in support of Indigenous-led land stewardship projects. That's another thing I would like to plug. Just use the relationships and the resources you have, leverage those. I also wanted to share, on the note of stories, that transition really has the view that we do this work as a community. We have kind of a mantra that if we act alone, it will be, if we wait for government to act, it will be too late. If we act alone, it will be too little too late. I'm sorry, I'm getting it wrong because I have a headache, but if we act as communities, it will be just, it could be just enough, just in time. So really, we have been embodying that type of narrative kind of since the beginning of transition, and we have some amazing stories to share. And one of the key goals of Regeneration Nation is to uplift those stories through kind of a high visibility week of action that will attract more media attention by showing these communities in action across the country in a kind of coordinated way that will get folks' attention. And one last thing I wanted to mention on the piece around stories, y'all saw my son, Gabriel. So our business, we have a small regenerative hemp and herbal medicine farm and retail business called Gabriel's Garden. And the story that we're trying to tell there, we're trying to connect with folks who are looking at alternatives to their health issues. Like our don't have to say much about how broken our healthcare system and our relationship to health is right now, given what we're seeing with COVID. But like people having health crises, that's often a time when they're open to more alternatives, especially when conventional things aren't working. And so we are telling the story that human health is connected to the health of our soil, and the ability to like sustain human civilization is connected to the health of our soil. And so we need to take ownership of that in order to leave behind a livable future for Gabriel and for all children. So it's just one example. And I loved in Regeneration that the piece around human health is so closely connected to environmental health, because I think that's a really good strategic story approach to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. So I have another question from the list I had shared with you all that I think I would like to explore. And going back to what you said, Julie, about the real need for a village to support caregivers, mothers right now at this time, especially the pandemic. I really felt that, and have been feeling that for my own kid, just how much he needs that, how much we all need that, and that it's really missing. So I'm curious to hear your reflection on how your experience as a mother has challenged you and connected you to the work of regeneration at this critical moment in the human and planetary story. So anything that comes to mind that you feel that you would want to share, I'll send it over to you, Julie. Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Okay. Lately, thank you for that. It's a really good question. Obviously, I think about this constantly and all the time. I've managed to cobble together a pretty rad group of women up here. We're from all over the place. It's mostly not local women. Stanwood is extremely way out there, dark blood red conservative. And while I do have friends and neighbors that I get along with quite well, we help each other with, slaughtering time and group work and things like that. They don't want to know if their kids are queer. They just don't want to know. And that's something that has been part of our work in the Chumash area for quite a while. We're looking at the ways that our ancestors talked about themselves and the ways that we categorize gender. And in our traditional language, Shmuich is what it's called in the Santa Barbara area. There's 7 Chumash languages, each mutually unintelligible as much as, Italian and French, very, very dense language area of California. But the one that my family speaks and is bringing back is called Shmuich. We've got at least 6 gender pronouns. There's probably more that we don't even know about. The way that we talk about plants and animals, again, is sort of gendered, but not really, because we've all noticed all the queerness happening with all the animals and plants that don't necessarily have sex for reproduction or with the same gender or whatever. And so being able to be a homeschool mom and raise my kids with this understanding that's based on, this is science. This isn't our opinion about things. We've observed these things for a long time now. Being able to bring some language into this finally, and being able to think differently by speaking a different language. And while there's some really beautiful ideas embedded in our language that I'm trying to pass on to my kids slowly, it's very difficult to bring back a language that was teetering on the brink of extinction, but we're doing it. Particularly my cousin Deborah in LA County. She's a Superior Court judge, and she's also our best linguist. And she's been instrumental in developing the programs that we can use to teach our kids these languages. So I'm very grateful to her, Deborah Sanchez. But like what I try to tell my kids is like, look, we do think about animals and rocks and water as having consciousness and having its own being. Right? It's a very different way of thinking about nature. Now, while we cannot scientifically prove that water is conscious and decides to be a bay or be a river or be rain, we can't prove that using Western science method. But we can show that people who feel this way and think this way build different looking communities. If you believe that everything around you is imbued with consciousness, intent, love and relationship, it's very difficult to then turn those things into commodities. So we can show that thinking in this way produces a different looking family, a different looking relationship between two people, between five people, between a village, between a town, between towns trading with each other. Those societies look very different. We can show that. So as a mom, I'm trying to start small because I'm just one person and I've got my little group of rad ladies who are learning alongside me. We're trying to teach our kids these basic lessons. You know, we're up against YouTube and Discord and Roblox and and we let our kids be kids. This is how they can socialize right now during this pandemic. That's what they've got, is their online friends and their few friends at school. So, you know, we're not doing the Luddite thing here on the farm. We're definitely letting our kids be 21st century kids. But I'm so inspired by the youth right now and how they're just like completely unafraid to be non-binary and trans and all of the different gender expressions, to use the pronouns and say, no, those aren't my preferred pronouns. These are my pronouns. The backbone that this generation is showing in the face of extreme prejudice makes me so proud. And being able to bring stories from our old traditions about revered two-spirit people, revered trans healers, people who were incredible astronomers who were also non-binary, being able to tell those stories to this generation, it is really landing. And they're saying, oh, these are people who live in a land as it is, not as we would like to overlay it with our socio-religious worldview. This is an evidence-based spiritual practice. That's what I'm trying to get across to my kids. But it can only be done in the village. And so when I'm back home in Santa Barbara, my cousin's there and I, we run the place. We're definitely, there's like 9 or 10 really central key women who just kind of make everything happen. There's quite a few really amazing activist men as well, but missionization and genocide really messed us up. We're extremely damaged. You know, we're trying our best to bring back the healing practices of our ancestors for ourselves, just so we can survive. But I really liked what Marissa had to say about being just enough, just in time. That's going to just be my mantra. Thank you so much for that, Marissa. Because this is where the real work is being done, is in these little tiny family groups where the moms are like, this ain't working. We got to do something else. This is not working, especially if you're a single mom. Oh, that is not working. We need each other so badly. Moms, dads, non-binary parents, trans parents, I don't care who you are, we need each other to raise our kids. And especially if we're going to be knitting ourselves together and telling these communally held stories, we're going to start needing to think outside the English patriarchal, extractive capitalist, turn every single thing you interact with into a thing worldview. That, I think that's absolutely key. So wherever you are, finding out what the traditional language is, where you live, finding out who's teaching that, finding out what it can teach you and how you can be useful to that group of people, and bringing back that language among young people, among yourselves. That worldview shift that happens when you can think outside a noun-based language is so powerful. I can't emphasize this enough.
Love that. I actually have a question for you, Julie. Do you think it would be valuable to have those language classes? Like, obviously we want Indigenous and Native youth to have access to their ancestral languages and reclaim them, but non-Indigenous folks having that instead of French, maybe in school, that you could learn the traditional language, right? That would be a really cool offering.
Yeah, it would. Some schools are doing that. I know in Hawaii and New Zealand, and also a few other places, that's just like standard language lessons in school. I know a lot of Haole kids that learned Hawaiian when they were in school. That should absolutely happen all over America. However, there are tribal groups who don't want to share their language. And if that's where they're at, then that's where they're at. But the tribes who do really want this to become lingua franca for the area, like it always has been, then they're trying to bring it into the public schools now. So if there's a way people can be active in that, I just want to say it's not an isolated thing. Language, learning Indigenous languages, you will find regeneration imprinted into those worldviews. And learning those languages, I think, is one of the big missing keys to this whole story.
Thank you, Julie. Samantha, what eager to hear your reflections, just how your experience as a mother challenges you and connects you to the work of regeneration.
I laugh aloud because my child definitely challenges me. I have two small little kids. I'm raising a 6-month-old and a just 3-year-old last week, and it's real. You know, in the COVID of it all, and in the not having a big enough village of it all, and the whole thing, it's been, you know, as they say, it's like it's the hardest job you're ever going to have, but it's also the most rewarding, and that's proving to be true. One observation I've had in that journey has been, you know, I came back to work after a few months off, and jumped into this new role as the executive director of Project Regeneration. And it was a bit terrifying. I mean, to start a new organization when you have like a 3-month-old and are like extremely sleep deprived. But what was so inspiring to me, and the reason why I decided to do it, was that the lessons of the friction of being a parent and a mother while trying to build is a teacher of where this dominant system needs to change. And actually in letting that be a teacher to me, I found myself surfacing insights that have made me a better leader, have made me a better collaborator. You know, like, and for example, you know, I had coming out of film industry in Hollywood after many years, you know, I was going back to work, and I was like, you know, you've had this urge to be really busy and like crank a lot of things out, and all of the, and just be on my phone all the time, and, you know, just all of these behaviors. And I just I mean, like, little people will not let you do that. So I found myself sort of feeling guilty or feeling frantic or feeling like just all of these. And what I started to do is actually give myself the space to observe the sort of manic anxiety that I was having. And I was realizing that, like, I was letting go of years and years and years in a dominant system that told me that I was a part of a machine and needed to function in that sort of mechanistic sort of way. So being a parent has been just a wonderful teacher in that way. And I think when I gave myself permission to see the friction as an insight, it actually has helped me then think about what kind of culture we want to build at Project Regeneration, right? Or what kind of partnerships do we want to build? And what are the expectations I have for others? I mean, you know, I love the mantra of, like, if you design for the most vulnerable, you design for everyone. And, you know, parents are pretty darn vulnerable. You know, and so I think a lot about, like, well, what I need right now is a lot of agency. I need a lot of flexibility. I need a lot of support. I need, you know, I need clarity, and I need security, financial security. I need a lot of things, and that's actually true of all of us. So, so that's, for me, I've been really grateful to the pain in a lot of ways, because my sort of I guess thesis or hypothesis is that the world we need to change is, we need to change into a world where there isn't these frictions, you know, and so that is the mission of the core of building a regenerative world, right? And regenerative industry, regenerative companies, regenerative community it has to be one where being a parent isn't a chore, right? And it's not so high friction. So I think it's tough, certainly, but a wonderful teacher.
I'll jump in and completely agree with that. I learned so much about myself and had also that experience of like losing myself or feeling like I was losing myself when I was becoming a parent. Um, and I feel like I've gone through a regenerative process and like reclaiming certain parts of myself, recognizing the ways in which the system compels you to feel guilty or feel like you're not doing enough. And I'm also raising a brilliant neurodivergent kid, and I've had to sit with him and be like, you know, there's a lot of things you're going to go through that you're going to have to recognize and be able to put aside and say, I'm not carrying that forward. And I can see that in terms of the story, like neurodivergence runs in my family. I'm pretty sure I qualify. It's just like we're going to have to find our own way, our own path forward. And those are good. They're not bad. They're not different. They're good. They're valid. And just like you said, Julie, the kids are so brave. And I want the systems that we put in place to make them feel secure enough, because you hear all those statistics where like young people or millennials are like, I don't want to have kids. The world's a mess. I don't know how I'm going to do that. And that's really heartbreaking. And it's super valid for folks to not want to pursue that. But for those that are holding that responsibility of bringing new humans into the world and taking care of them, we need more support. So I have so much faith in the power of parents, caregivers, mothers, like really helping to guide a lot of this work and these stories, like uplifting those stories. I know so many amazing moms, especially the moms and the women that you mentioned, Julie, but moms in the Santa Barbara area who do so much on top of what they're already doing to take care of their families. And it enrages me. It's like so unfair that the system in place makes them have to go against the grain. There's so much friction in place for them to just do what we all need. And it's infuriating. Anyway, those are my 2 cents.
We're daughters too. We're also caring for our elders.
Exactly.
We can't do either one. And it's terrible, because what needs to happen is that those elders and those little ones need to be in the same room a lot. They need to be teaching each other. When you see people that can come together like that in a healthy way, it's good for everyone. And we don't have the resources or the support to do either of those things, let alone well. And can you imagine how it would change the millennials' outlooks on having kids if they knew for sure that if they got sick, if they didn't have a job, if they needed to go back to school, that they'd be 100% supported. And, maybe this generation's maybe going to do something about climate chaos that might also inspire them quite a bit. And so you're all right. We cannot wait for other people to do this. We're the ones that have to do it.
Completely agree. Marissa, I wanted to see if you had any comments to offer, and then I think we're maybe going to shift over into some closing remarks, a few questions from the audience if we have any. Marissa.
Yeah, before I started working for Transition US, I had a brief career in international development in Washington, D.C. and human rights. And one of the things I learned in my short time in DC is that power really can corrupt. And so when I left DC, I took with me this message that, like, to become a good leader, one needs a lot of humility and kind of a strong spiritual foundation. And I think that's what motherhood is giving me for sure. I consider humility my spiritual path, and just constantly surrendering to kind of getting my ass kicked by life. So there's that. And then the other piece I wanted to share is, having a background in human rights and understanding kind of what it's like in other parts of the world, day-to-day reality, as well as when civilizations collapse. My desire to alleviate suffering in the world really fuels my activism. And it, having a child, it's now so much more real. Just the mama bear kicks in of like, I will do whatever I need to do to secure a livable future for my son. And so right now my partner and I both are really feeling the need to get rooted in place so we can start building those systems of resilience that he can learn to tend and rely on. That's what I would like to share.
Thank you, Marissa. I want to create some space. Julie, Samantha, any kind of closing remarks? I wish we could spend just like hours drinking coffee or chatting or whatever somewhere together, but this has been so amazing, so rich. Julie, just some space for you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm starting small here. I don't think there's a possibility that I'll be able to move permanently back to my homeland. The water there is not doing well, but I'm trying very much to get down there as often as I can without flying, because that's terrible. So what I'm trying to do with, our new capabilities with Zoom and other things is do what I've been doing, only here on my own farm. Finding local kids that want to learn how to do food forest and regenerative horticulture, building cob tiny homes where we can have families that aren't, that can barely afford to hang on living here anymore, because now we're kind of like the Bay Area up here. It's very expensive. We need to have more housing equity, and I've got 8 acres here and really good water. We want to put in 3 or 4 self-sustaining homes, and that's going to take labor and money. And that's going to take a much bigger community than I currently have. So that's something that my honey of 20 years and I have been working on and working towards, but we just keep running into not enough money, not enough people. And that we're working on that. That's my goal. But yeah, I'm happy to be reaching out to other organizations. We've been kind of isolated here during COVID and just sort of cocooning for a while. This is the first time I've come out and spoken in a group like this in almost a year. It's really nice to, you had to convince me, because I turned myself off of doing this for a while, but as soon as you told me about what y'all are doing, I was all, I'm in. I want to talk to people. I want to hear what they're doing. So thank you so much for including me in this conversation. It's given me new motivation and new hope. And this is the kind of thing I'm going to do whether or not I have hope. And so what I do need is help to create that small seed here, create an example.
Thank you, Julie. It's an absolute honor to have had you with us. Samantha, any closing remarks or thoughts to share with the group?
I mean, just gratitude that you all came together and invited me to participate. And I feel really, to use Marissa's language, humbled that I'm speaking and not listening to all of you with all of the incredible insights and experience you all have. And so just grateful to be in this space with you all. And, as we birth a new organization at Project Regeneration, just share that our desire is to be of service to the tiresome work you all are doing. And so if there are things we can do to help, let us know. We're doing a lot of listening right now to observe and to understand how we can live and exist in this space in a way that's helpful. And we're thrilled to hear about Regeneration Nation and excited to see what comes of it all.
Thank you, Samantha. Again, an honor to have you with us. And I look forward to the collaborative potential that we kind of incubated here. Just kind of letting y'all know a little bit more what Transition's up to. As you mentioned, we have an amazing network of folks doing great work in their communities, and we can learn from each other. We can share those stories, share those resources in a new kind of way. Marissa, any closing thoughts or remarks?
Just echoing the gratitude, and it would be wonderful to hear from other folks in the audience. Do we have time for that, Jess?
Yeah, we can take a couple questions if folks are willing to do that. Samantha and Julie, are you able to stay on for a few more minutes? Really appreciate it. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Or Marissa, did you want to offer any other comments, or you were good? Ready for questions now? Cool. Any hands? Questions for folks on the round table, or just general comments, appreciations? I see. Lori, were you raising your hand? Okay, gratitude. I'm seeing gratitude hands. Great.
Looks like maybe Sean's raising his hand.
Okay, Sean. Don, do you mind helping me with that? My computer, I can't see like a lot of the folks.
Yeah, and folks can either type a question into the chat or use the reactions button on Zoom to raise your hand. That's the easiest way.
Yeah, I just wanted to express a lot of gratitude for the conversation. It's really heartening for me to hear all of this, and I'm a disabled stay-at-home dad, and so I connect with a lot of what's being said, even as a male. And I've found that it's very difficult having conversations with a lot of my white male friends and family members around these issues. And I don't know that I have a question for anyone in particular, but if anybody has any insights on how to kind of open up these conversations into the space of just listening. I mean, that's it. I don't know how to put it really plainly, but honestly, it's really difficult to have a conversation with most people I interact with on a regular basis, just about the importance of listening. So sitting here and listening to all of this is really powerful to me, but how do we open up that conversation to where the pressure comes off of having to have the answers or have the responses, and letting people know that they can just listen. They don't have to have the answers. And there's a lot of opportunity that comes from that, and a lot of pressure that disappears. If anybody has any insights into how to open up those conversations, that'd be great. And if not, just gratitude.
Thank you, Sean, so much for being with us here this evening. Samantha, Julie, or Marissa, any responses to Sean's question? It's a big one.
I'll just start in saying thank you so much for sharing that and your experience. In terms of getting people to listen, I think it's such a wise and insightful observation. And I feel like for me, I've also been noticing that as well, and thinking about how do we create and hold more spaces for people, as you said, like to sit and to listen, and also to change the norms of feeling like we have to be arguing or debating or having the answers right away. And, I'm kind of obsessed with Krista Tippett. I don't know if you guys are, she does On Being, that podcast, sort of spirituality. And one of the sort of frame she has, which I love, is about living in the question, and not necessarily moving to the answer. And I found that has always been really spoke to me. And so I feel like we could be holding more spaces to explore questions, and not necessarily trying always to solve or find the answer, and that the right answer will come to us when we're ready for it. It's not an answer as much as just like I feel you, I feel the same, I feel similarly. And for me, I've been also just reflecting about how we hold different kinds of spaces, and how media can be a way to do that as well. Like, how can we create spaces and sparks that people want to participate in, that changes the way that they engage, whether it's podcasts, whether it's reading, whether it's these kinds of forums. And I think there's a lot of play that we can do to build those spaces.
I have something I'd like to say about that.
Please.
Teaching about plants, it's a vast world. And I tell my students, you're going to hear me say, I don't know a lot, because California is vast. There are so many plants here. And the safe person, when you're dealing with plants that you're going to be ingesting, is the one who tells you they don't know something. Trust that person, because they're not going to make you eat something that's not safe. They're going to say, I don't know for sure. So one of the best teachers I ever had, he was the world's foremost expert on pines. That was his specialty. His name was Dr. Bob Heller. He looked like David Attenborough. He was just this sweet, little gray-haired, kind of stoop-shouldered man who was one of the greatest naturalists, Western European style naturalists I've ever met. And he had a great deal of respect for my family and I, and said that we were some of the best naturalists that he ever knew. So he had respect. But when he would get up in front of a classroom, this is something he would say that I've adopted. He would say, this is what there is to know about pines. And he would draw this huge circle on the board. And then he'd draw this little circle and he'd say, and this is what I know. And isn't it so exciting that we have all the rest of this to explore together? There's so much that I don't know, and I've been studying my whole life, and you're all going to bring me little pieces, and I'm going to bring you little pieces. So let me share with you the little piece that I know. That is such a powerful thing to be able to say to people, and just step aside from the whole cult of the expert, to be able to say, isn't it so great that there's so much we don't know? Here's the little piece I can share with you, and the rest I'm just listening with you. And that has been so powerful when I've come out to teach my students. Look, I'm here as a teacher, but I'm really not. I'm learning so much every day. And we're just trying to this world is just wild and vast. And there's so much going on that we don't understand. Let's just sit in it. Let's just sit in this question, like you said. That's the more exciting place to be anyway. So I hope that helped.
Beautiful. I was about to tear up, or I was like, oh my God, my heart is feeling very full. Thank you all. Wanted to check to see if there are any other questions from the audience. And then I think we're going to have a message from Brett, and then our time tonight was going to end. I don't want it to. This was so nourishing. Thank you both. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you all for being with us here this evening. So last call for questions.
Hi, I'm on the phone. This is Sarah
Nice,
in
Sarah.
New Jersey. Hey, everybody. Wonderful conversation tonight. I just wanted to kind of reflect or draw out, being here in what is being anticipated as, a potential for collapse. And I think everybody knows that. And so, and that means different things to different people, of course. But I want to say, Julie, your comments about the potential for the healing of the landscape in California, given the allowing for the indigenous leadership in that process, is a visionary statement, and one worth upholding and cleaving to, if I, and should be and needs to be a model for healing, across the world. And it is, there is such healing happening. John Liu and ecological restoration actually in California and elsewhere and others. But I just want to uphold that. And also what you said, Julie, about please appropriate these methods. God help us gently. We need to know how to raise food everywhere. And so there's so much to be learned. And so if you have any resources to offer, any suggestions for, enacting that would be great. And then Samantha, the role that someone such as yourself can play in publicizing the alternatives that are out there. And I just personally am a fan of the concept of a massive ad campaign. So I just want to float that. I know there's a strong narrative can be painted through 30-second spots. So with, the alternatives being made clear to people, And thank you, Marissa and Jess and Don for your participation and your hosting, and glad to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Just want to make some space if Samantha or Julie, if you have any responses to Sarah's comments and questions.
I was thinking about Marissa and thinking Marissa probably has some really good resources for how to get your hands in the dirt. I'm seeing that in her comments, she's talking about a massive regeneration of public lands. Yeah, I'm all for that. I think one way that people who aren't indigenous to North America can get involved in this process, getting your hands in the dirt and so on, is working hard for indigenous people to be able to do that in terms of getting our lands back, getting access to our lands, because we don't have anything to teach if we don't have any place to do it. And that's just the simple, harsh truth for very many of us that are landless tribes. But also I want to just step outside the box for a second here and talk about what I saw in Scotland and Finland, because very many people here have ancestry in Northern Europe. Some of the most beautifully managed oak forests I've ever seen in my life were on the west coast of Scotland. And as a botanist, I was standing there and going, that did not happen by itself. There's some people doing this. And as I scratched the surface, I found that the Scottish people are passionate about rewilding their homelands, bringing back wetlands, which, by the way, sequester 30 times the carbon of woodlands, which is totally fascinating. And now they know that. And so that kind of work, getting your hands in the ground and doing that regenerative healing work is happening all over Europe, which is absolutely beautiful. In Finland as well, I got to meet quite a few Sami people and Finnish national people who are passionate about bringing their forests to a state of health that hasn't been seen in a while. So I think wherever you are, making sure that the people from that place can access the lands and be in charge of those projects, that's where it's at right now. I wish I had organizations I could point you to, but the one that my organization, Steward Plant Mentorship Collective, we deliberately decided to not be a nonprofit because none of us have the time to administer that or pay for the lawyer or do anything like that. So we're umbrellaed under an organization based in Ventura called Wistoyo Foundation. I'll write it down in the comments here. And they are a very fantastic Chumash-led group that works to protect river valleys, they've acquired a piece of land for us to be able to get back to and regenerate. I can't say enough good things about Wistoyo. And before the pandemic, their primary bread and butter was school groups coming and doing visitations. And now I think they might be starting to get back to that, but they could definitely use people's support. So I'll write their website down here in the comments right now. So, but I don't have a whole lot of that other organization, sorry.
No worries. I went ahead and added Wistoyo to the chat, so it's there. Thank you for mentioning that work. And then Samantha, wanted to make space for you. And then I think we're at the end of our time together, y'all.
I'll just make mine quick, which is yes, yes, yes. I love the idea of an ad campaign. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking a lot about is how do we use arts and creative and in really thoughtful ways to provoke people into these experiences and to lift up the network of organizations doing things in new ways. So we're trying to sort of figure that out right now, what that looks like, and how we pull in folks who this is what they do into the mix, right? Who are better than I could ever be at a line or an image or a story. And I think it's going to take all of us, right, to end on the theme of It Takes a Village. And so excited to be in community with you all, connecting to creative communities on this work.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to send it over to you, Brett, to close this out, offer an invitation to the group.
All right, thanks, Jess. Thanks, Julie, Samantha, Marissa. Really appreciate this conversation and everybody who's been involved. As the new fundraising development lead, it's an interesting place to be in. And I just want to thank you all, one, for your contribution here, your presence, because a lot of times we see fundraising development as supporting financial resources, but I see it as a sharing of resources towards a common vision. And that doesn't have to be financial. That's your presence, that's your skills, that's your vulnerability, that's your energy, that's so many other things. And you all have stayed until the end, which we went a little over time, so bonus points to you all for that. But just want to thank you all for, many of you shared your financial resources towards this vision and this campaign, and we're extremely grateful for that. And we're going to continue to build the momentum with that. Now, you also contribute your presence if you were at all compelled to contribute something else, whether it be connections to networks, whether it be another small donation or anything that you want to contribute for this shared vision. We are very open to that. And we see that Jess just posted the link. You can stay updated on Regeneration Nation on that link that Jess just sent in the chat. So just want to give sincere thanks, gratitude for everyone for showing up and the incredible conversation we had tonight. And of course, if there's any way you want to be involved, we are all ears. So thanks so much, everybody. And you enjoy the rest of your days. And take care.
Thank you all. Blessings. Be well. Take care. Go get your hands dirty in the dirt.